What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to make a piece of round stock that's perfectly straight from here to here, maybe with an accuracy of, I don't know, plus or minus 5 or 10 thousandths. And I need to make a couple of these that are identical. And I bought this little lathe thinking I could do this, and I find it's impossible. Even if the lathe were more expensive, bigger and more powerful, it would still be the same thing. I'm using a tool rest and chisel held by hand to accomplish the task here. And as far as I can see, you know, I can't do it. Probably can't be done. I think we're going to have to take a slightly different approach here. So this is what I've come up with. It's not very much unlike the other lathe I was using, except if you notice, that is if you're familiar with wood lathes, you'll notice that the tailstock track has been offset. I've used a hand drill to power the thing. I like the hand drill because it's very handy, it's light, it's reversible, which is really handy in some instances. And the hand drill doesn't have to really be very powerful. All it has to do is turn the piece. The power, the cutting power, is supplied by the table saw. And you'll see what I mean. Raise the blade up all the way. Lock it. Protect my eyesight. Protect my hearing. So I've just cut this. It's pretty straight. I just measured it, and it's within 5 thousandths between here and here, which was pretty good for woodworking. We can also do. It can also cut a taper. All I have to do adjust this according to how much of a taper I want, and I'll put maybe about. There's a calibration here, and I'll set it at about 1/4 of an inch, and I'll recut it. So I've cut a taper from here to here, and I can adjust the taper by this taper guide here pretty much as or as little as you want. And it's calibrated, as I mentioned before, it's calibrated here with these numbers, with those lines. One thing about this machine is you got to keep the chips out of it. It's sensitive to chips. If you allow chips to get in between here and here, or else between the fence and the frame, cuts aren't going to be accurate. Also, you want to make sure there's no chips on the bottom. Okay, so I'll show you something else that the table saw doesn't do really a very good job at, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. Okay, I've reset the fence to take a cut, and I've set the taper guide to 0 taper, and I'm going to make a cutter, and I'll show you. One thing you're limited with the table saw, if you notice here, is it doesn't make a square shoulder. Okay? It's really impossible to configuration of blade to make a square shoulder. However, even though the table saw can't do it, the router can. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So as I mentioned, the table saw blade really can't make a square shoulder there. But the router table is perfectly capable of doing that. I'll show you how it's done. First of all, this is the center line of the router bit. And it's exactly 6 inches over between here and the center line of this. So I've set the fence 6 inches over from the center. So both axes coincide, come in here. The diameter is going to be determined by the router bit height. And here's a very simple chart that it's a bit diameter versus router bit height. It's just a very simple linear equation. Y equals 1/2 x plus 1.5. If you plug in the value x, which you want to determine the diameter be, just plug it into that and it'll tell you what the bit height will be. So I just kind of set it at an arbitrary number. I set a stop. That'll determine the depth of the cut, actually the length of the cut. So I'm going to turn around here and make the cut. Turn the router bit on first. And you'll see that it's made a very, very nice square shoulder, and that may be very useful in some applications. In fact, the router bit can actually do the same job as the table saw blade. Pretty much interchangeable. However, you'll find that the table saw is much more adapted to making much heavier cut. The router bit really doesn't like making very heavy cut. So I'm going to set the router bit up, and I'll show you how we can use a router to do the same basic thing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use a router to do basically the same thing that a table saw did. The router really doesn't like to make very heavy cuts, whereas a table saw can make a heavy cut as it likes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the machine through because of the router bit's rotation. If I run it through this way, it could pull it out of my hands. So I'm going to set the cut here at a 16th, which will mean it'll take 1/8 off the diameter. So it does basically the same thing as the table saw, except it doesn't take the heavier cut, doesn't like heavy cuts. It can also do the same tapered cut if you adjust the taper guide here, same thing. So anyhow, what it does next, I'll show you what it does next, is that it's able to cut hexagonal or octagonal, non-round pieces. And I'll show you how that's done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the workpiece out. Just simply loosen the tailstock, put this aside here, and now I'm going to take the drill out because we're not going to be using the drill now. We're going to use something else to cut the stock into a non-round shape there. Set the drill aside. This is what we're going to use. This is a radial indexing head, and I've got it now set up to make an octagon. It's set up in each 45-degree increments. It could really be set up with 360 degrees. You could cut anything. You cut triangles, squares, pentagons, hexagons, heptagons, octagons, nonagons, decagons. You can cut anything with this, as long as it, when this is calibrated. But right now, as I mentioned, it's calibrated to cut an octagon. So we'll load the machine, a piece of stock here. If you notice, the tailstock is spring loaded. It keeps a constant tension on here. So I load it up, tighten the tailstock. There's an indexing mark on the, if you notice, there's an indexing mark on the top of the frame here, and I've put the number 1 indexing mark at 0. So you know where you started. So I've got the indexing head on, I've got the saw set up, I've got this mark lined up with first mark on the indexing head. I've got my stop set up so I can't run the saw blade into either the frame of the machine or the drive center. So now I'm going to put my hearing protection on, eye protection. I'm going to make my first cut here. So we've got an octagon here. It's perfectly straight and it's very accurate. The difference between, I measured it, the difference between here and here is plus or minus 0.02 of an inch, which is pretty good for woodworking. It also has the capability, like as in the round, it has the capability of cutting a taper. And all you do is just open up the taper attachment. It's calibrated here. I'll open it up maybe for 30 seconds. And I'll make a tapered cut now. So you can see it cuts a taper on there, very nice, very accurate, very straight. You can kind of see it. See the cross section is perfect octagon. So I'm going to show how we can cut a groove down the length of these with a router. Several different bits you could use. You could use a pointed bit, or you could use the rounded bit which I have in there. A square bit. So you get an idea of what this thing can do. As I mentioned, there's several different types of bits you can use to cut grooves or whatever you want down the length of this of your workpiece. So when I started cutting this, I made this everything because to demonstrate the capabilities of the machine. But when I started, it was about 2 5/8 in diameter, like the additional diameter. That's about the maximum diameter this particular machine can do. But it can also cut down to just a bit over ½ inch, which I'll demonstrate. So the range is about ½ inch to about 2 5/8 inch diameter. And this machine, particular machine, can cut the piece a little bit over 12 inches. It would be very easy to make the machine longer to cut virtually any length that you wanted to a point. So that's about the minimum diameter this thing can cut. It's just a bit over ½ inch. There's also one thing that the machine can do is if you wanted to put any kind of hand embellishments on there, the machine can also be used just like a regular lathe. It has a tool rest that can be positioned just about anywhere. And now I can sand it. I really don't want the drill running in this direction. So that's the beauty part about the drill is you can reverse the direction. So there it is. As I mentioned, you can put grooves in it, rings, anything you want to do, any kind of hand detail you want to work on this thing. You can also use it as a regular lathe. I want to talk a little bit about the safety of this machine. You know, like any other piece of woodworking equipment, it's potentially dangerous. You got to know what you're doing. You got to pay attention. You got to be diligent. I've used this machine to cut lots and lots of different stuff in just about every configuration you can imagine. And it doesn't have any bad habits. It doesn't kick on me. It never binded. It never jammed on me. Because this is spring loaded, the piece has never come loose on me. It's pretty safe. And you'll notice that whenever I'm operating this machine, that my hands are well away from the cutting tool, whether it be the bit or the saw blade, okay? To ensure that you're not going to run the machine into the chuck or the frame, I always set stops. So it's no more or less safe than any other piece of woodworking machine you're probably used to using. So there you have it. So here's some of the stuff I've cut with the machine. There's a piece of octagonal taper. You saw me just cut a couple of these. Piece I cut using a V router bit, a piece of octagonal tapered. Here's a piece of straight tapered octagonal round, which I've kind of demonstrated some of the various embellishments on here. It's a piece of looks like a slightly tapered octagonal. Octagonal tapered, round tapered. This demonstrates the type of work it does with a router. You can put a straight shoulder on there if this has to fit into something and the shoulder has to be straight. Here's a piece I'm making right now. This is going to be a set of nunchucks. The reason I've cut some of this away, I'm trying to make them really, really light. And the reason I put the grooves in here is because it allows you to really, really get a grip on this thing. That's what I've made a lot of nunchucks with this machine. The thing is really ideally set for doing this, making nunchucks. Here's some more round tapered. Another piece of round tapered. Round shoulder. There's another piece. There's a hexagonal piece I made with a straight shoulder. I'm sorry, octagonal, round here, straight shoulder, octagonal, beyond straight. So that's about it. It gives you kind of an idea what the capabilities of the machine are. It's a pretty handy tool.